नमस्कार दोस्तों, आपका स्वागत। I'm going to discuss a geopolitical conflict, which is the first video in on this channel, which will involve geopolitics. Now, the reason why I have not been uploading for this past month is because I have been analyzing, monitoring, and researching about the current conflict in Iran and the effect that it has on Bharat. And what I learned is very interesting, and I hope you watch until the end so that you can also gain some clarity about this current conflict. So, for those who do not know what is happening in Iran, since February 28th, the US-Israel coalition have conducted coordinated strikes on Iranian military and nuclear assets. They have claimed that Iran poses a preemptive not preemptive, but Iran poses a potential threat to US and Israel during negotiations. So as a result, they conducted preemptive strikes on Iran, which assassinated the supreme leader Ali Khamenei and also has degraded one-third of Iran's capabilities. And Iran has retaliated with missile and drone strikes on US and Israeli assets, along with attacks on shipping and Gulf infrastructure. This has led to a more regional conflict, and this had led to the partial control and blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the world's most important oil checkpoint. I have discussed about the Strait of Hormuz, and you will see how it affects Bharat later in this video. Iran is also using a tactic called permission-based transit, which allows strategically connected or simply friendly countries to pass through the Strait of Hormuz but not its adversaries. So for example, Russia, China, and even India now are examples of countries who can pass through the Strait of Hormuz because they are huge trade partners with Iran. But currently, the war is more of a stalemate, but it is escalating with no current solution. The US has degraded, once again, I state that the US has only degraded one-third of Iran's capabilities, despite claiming that it has won the war. Iran still has underground missile bases and underwater mines, which the US often discusses when discussing naval operations in the Strait of Hormuz or a potential invasion of Iran. Now, why does this conflict matter to Bharat? So, first of all, it is about the oil prices. The oil supply disruption from Iran's control of Hormuz has led to an increase in global oil prices. Many analysts say this is similar to the 1970s oil crises and even the crisis after the 2003 Iraq invasion. So, why does this matter to Bharat? So, approximately 20% of global oil passes through the Hormuz, but Bharat imports 85% of crude oil from the Strait of Hormuz, and Bharat's economy is also very sensitive to prices. So this immediately led to inflation, physical stress, and pressure on the rupee. Now, second of all, this also affects the Indian diaspora, who are called as NRIs. So approximately 8 to 9 million, also known so is basically 80 to 90 lakh Indians reside in the Gulf, which is countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, etc. So this war immediately led to evacuations, although India conducted evacuations before the war was about to start, just in case it was going to start. It also led to job disruptions because a lot of Indians work jobs, very big jobs in the Gulf. And there are also a lot of laborers there, and it led to decline in remittances due to not having any stable connection with Bharat. But now the situation is more stable, so hopefully it may remain that same. Now the wartime control of Hormuz also affects Bharat. Because ships are attacked, mined, or rerouted, it has also led to the rise in insurance costs. And once again, the ship passage is selectively controlled by Iran. So for India, that causes trade delays, higher logistic costs, and a disruption in supply chains because it is not able to properly receive any oil tankers or any commercial trade coming through the Strait of Hormuz. And there has also been mines, drones, and missile threats in the Indian Ocean, just like how Iris Dana, Iranian ship coming from Visakhapatnam, was attacked near Sri Lanka by the US armed forces, and how Iran also launched a drone missile strike on Diego Garcia, which is a US and UK base in the Indian Ocean. And this has also been discussed on the news. Even LPG tankers which are heading to India are stranded and needed to be escorted, despite Iran claiming that India has safe passage. And this forces the Indian Navy, this forced the Indian Navy into a more defensive stance. If you study the strategic patterns and understand them in the countries involved in this conflict, and it may not seem very new when you read the news once again. So first, let us discuss the US, the United States. Its current campaign in Iran is similar to common patterns from Iraq in 2003, Libya in 2011, Afghanistan in 2001, and recently Venezuela in January. So it uses freedom rhetoric, just like how it claimed to intervene on behalf of Iran, the Iranian people after they suffer many massacres from protests, and the US initially starts out with very lethal airstrikes, just like how it did on February 28th, but eventually leads to long instability, which forces the US to withdraw its troops. And is also oil rhetoric, because what all of these countries have in common is that they have huge oil resources, and the US is in huge need of oil. So as a result, you taking advantage of the internal issues within these countries, the US conducted operations, and Iran is one of the examples. And this relates now because the Iran went from a quick airstrike campaign to no decisive victory, because now both sides are taking up defensive stances and making their own plans on how the course of the war will go, and this leads to prolonged war and gradual expansion of objectives, just like how the US went from airstrikes to now planning an invasion of Iran, a ground operation of Iran, which targets nuclear sites, oil sites, ports, etc. So that is also a pattern. But the only difference is that Iran's system makes regime change more difficult, because Iran's system is more decentralized, meaning it is very hard to completely destroy Iran's capabilities to be able to conduct regime change. And you will see how throughout this war, the Iran system will only become more decentralized. Now let us discuss Iran. So Iran avoids direct war with US or Israel, because it does not share any border with the US or Israel, and it is very risky to do a full-scale war that it is doing right now. So Iran uses proxies such as Hezbollah and Shia missile or like Houthis, etc. But currently, after October 7th and after Israel's campaigns in Lebanon, in Gaza, Yemen, these proxies have been weakened, but they still have the capabilities to assist Iran in its war. Iran uses more missiles and drones because it is currently under sanctions, and it can only receive weapons from China or Russia. So Iran is forced to produce more missiles and drones. Now a common pattern is that there is maritime disruption, right? Just like now, Iran has used maritime disruption as a tactic in its wars, and you will understand how. So it's the same doctrine as before. Ship attacks average over Strait of Hormuz, like during the tanker war in 2009, and from 2012, even in 2019, have been lot of there was a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, and Iran has a decentralized military command. Iran is capable of fighting long, cheap, and avoidable wars with asymmetric warfare. Because Iran's goal is not to win but to survive the war. And by making it very cheap for Iran and by being able to negotiate, Iran can have a more fair stance, a fair ground in this war. Now let us discuss now coming to the Gulf states. The Gulf states like UAE, Saudi, etc. They depend on US protection and weapons against Iran. And they are very vulnerable to Iranian strikes. Despite being very rich with high GDP per capita and having the petrodollar, they are still very vulnerable to Iranian strikes, and we have seen how this war has shown that. And now oil facilities have been destroyed and there is fear of escalation, so they have done quite diplomacy such as talks with Iran and defense parks. Now let us now the very important part is the Hormuz blockade. Now this is very similar to the tanker war during the Iran-Iraq war. So the Iran-Iraq war had tanker attacks by Iran and Iraq, and there were naval escorts done by the US, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. And the tanker war resulted in global oil disruptions and militarization of sea lanes. But the only difference in this conflict is that it uses more drones, more precision missiles, which is more advanced technology, and also uses cyber warfare for hacking. What was the historical impact on India so that we can understand it today? So the oil disruptions led to inflation crises such as 1970s and 1991. The Gulf ordered to evacuations of NRIs and also other conflicts such as Kuwait and Libya, escort missions just like now, anti-piracy, monitoring in the Strait of Hormuz. Now India historically remained neutral, and in this conflict it still remains neutral. But the mistake that kept happening is that it reacted to regional instability instead of trying to prepare for any potential instability. So what should Bharat do now as per our maritime doctrine? What are some suggestions? And how much is Bharat currently matching those those pillars? So first is surveillance first defense. India should expand drone and satellite coverage in the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman. The Indian Navy should also deploy AUVs, which are autonomous underwater vehicles, to detect mines. They should build maritime intelligence grid using RAW, IITs and DRDO. So the goal of this is to see threats before they reach Indian waters instead of simply reacting to threats after they happen. So that Bharat properly prepared. Next is civilian military cooperation. This is a very important aspect for Bharat that is needed. So what we need is coordination between the Indian Navy and shipping companies so that there is better safety in the Strait of Hormuz, and there should be also maritime advisories for oil tankers and commercial ships coming to India, and a form of intelligence that can track which route is risky for ships to go through. The goal and protecting crude oil and LPG and LNG tankers is also important, which is what the Indian Navy is already doing. So the goal would be to convert commercial shipping into a more protected network so that if any conflict happens anywhere which affects Bharat, it can be more, the trade routes won't be affected as much. Next is diplomacy. Bharat's advantage is trusting diplomacy. India is already doing this, but it should maintain ties with Iran and energy and geography, because Iran is our largest trade partner with the Chabahar port, and we also receive a lot of oil from Iran also. The US with security, despite disagreements with the US over tariffs and other issues, the US is still a security partner, so we should still maintain somewhat ties with the US and the Gulf states too, so that we can protect our NRIs and we can continue trade with them. But another thing we should do is very important. We should strengthen relations with Oman. Because if we strengthen relations with Oman, they are right outside the Hormuz Strait. So if anything occurs once again in the Hormuz, then we can get the help of Oman so that we can use their ports as a way to safely get our ships to Bharat. And once again, we should still maintain neutrality, that we should be acceptable to all sides, whether it is the Israel or Iran. So we should control sea lanes also. So the action should to be taken. It is the action to be taken if escalation continues. So escort Indian tankers in the same way as the tanker war. We are already doing this, but it should continue. There should be quiet deployment near the Strait of Hormuz. We are already doing this with our ships in the Gulf of Oman, and we should ensure trade routes are safe for Indian ships, but not only in the Strait of Hormuz. It should also be in other choke points also, such as the Malacca and the Bab el Mandeb. So the goal of this is to guarantee energy and trade should continue flowing into India. What I realize is this war is not only a regional war but also a maritime conflict over a choke point. So Iran's weapon is its geography, which is the Hormuz Strait, because its geography, such as the mountains and its grip over the Strait of Hormuz, makes it difficult for its enemies to completely degrade in Iran's capabilities. And the US weakness is that it cannot fully secure the Strait of Hormuz quickly because of mines, Iranian tactics. And this war also has a global impact on energy and shipping trade. Now this war is also a test of strategic maturity for Bharat. Whatever decision that the Indian government makes will directly affect the people and the economy. So if the Indian government reacts as before, such as in previous conflicts, then it will remain an economic surprise for Bharat. But if the Indian government acts preemptively through the pillars I recommended, then it can emerge as an Indian Ocean stabilizing power. So it can make the situation for Bharat even more better. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you have learned something about the Iran war, which you may not have learned as from before. So, Jai Hind, Dharmo Rakshate, Rakshita.